So when I'm doing a regular bicep curl and focusing on the load, it's nice, it's smooth, the movement is not, it seems essentially effortless. When I start applying intent, the movement is almost like, we'll say, jerky and slower because my body's trying to manage what the hell am I supposed to do with this combination bicep-tricep movement. If I really wanted to get more out of my biceps, it would be better to simply actually just put more load directly on the bicep.
Well, now you too can have muscles! Huh? With anchor arms!
What's up, mates? Evan from Evolutionary Aesthetics, and in this video I'm going to discuss the holy grail of gym bro terms, mind-muscle connection. When it comes to mind-muscle connection, for starters, there is no clear-cut definition. You can't just find a random-ass dictionary and find specifically what mind-muscle connection means. We hear phrases from your average gym bro to all of the Mr. Olympias, essentially, and then any TikToker you'll probably find online. Someone has something to say about the importance of mind-muscle connection. To demonstrate that everybody has their own definition of what mind-muscle connection means to them, I just went up to random people at the gym. I guess not random, I know these people. But I went up to people and put them on the spot and just asked them the question, what does mind-muscle connection mean to you? And I will play the clips of what they have to say.
Okay, mind-muscle connection to me is being able to mentally feel the muscle. So when you're flexing it or engaging it, like you feel it. It's not just flexing the muscle without being aware of it. So I guess that's my explanation.
One of the basic foundations of bodybuilding.
Training with a purpose. I'm sure everybody notices when you bounce your pecs. That's mind muscle connection. Being able to flex your pecs, bench press, squeezing everything at the end, being able to isolate the muscles that you want to target.
I find that mind-muscle connection is the thing that's most necessary to actually hit your stride when it comes to building muscle, because without that, you can't isolate properly.
Mind-muscle connection to me is like when you think about the muscle that you're training, for example, a lat pull-down, like you actually like feel it in your lats, not just like going up and down with the weight, like going through the motions. You actually have to feel it in your muscles.
It's really just thinking about the muscle that you're trying to use, and like if you like touch like your tricep while doing tricep pull downs, and you're gonna be thinking about that muscle like isolated, and that's gonna help you have like a better pump or like hit that muscle harder. Does that make sense?
What mind-muscle connection means to me is when I can feel every single rep, whether it's releasing the tension or contracting the muscle, but I feel every single muscle fiber. And when I get a nasty pump, that's when I know that my muscle connection is on point.
Mind-muscle connection to me is where you can think about the muscle you're working, you can actively feel it engaged during your workout.
So mind and muscle connection to me is like what Tom Platt said, is if there's only one body part on your body, let's just say it's your legs, and you're doing a squat, right? Your hips aren't in motion, it's all about your quad and your hamstrings pushing the weight up. So this is the only thing that's pushing it, right?
Yeah, so if you're squatting, damn, I really want this to focus on my quads or my ass or something like that, then you can like think about it and then it'll start burning.
My opinion, what muscle mind connection is basically you contracting the muscle, actually feeling the muscle during the movement, but at the end of the day, everyone has their own opinion on it, so what do I know?
So those answers were all over the place. There were some common themes, but in general, you could tell that people were struggling to give a clear definition because there isn't a clear definition. The purpose of this video is to define what it means and put it in a way that makes sense for you guys. So the definition that I have is that the nervous system will automatically use the targeted muscles to oppose the resistance of an exercise if the exercise is performed with proper setup and execution. So the two main things within that definition to achieve the coveted mind-muscle connection is 1, to properly set up an exercise, and then 2, to properly execute it. These are things that I have learned within courses I've taken from N1 education, not the 4 years that I spent trying to get achieving an exercise science degree. The biomechanics course that I took from N1 education completely shits on the courses, biomechanics included, that I took at my university. And N1 for sure takes a crown for just being the most knowledgeable source and being able to provide this information that a gym bro would dream of knowing. The first thing I mentioned of setting up an exercise correctly requires a few different things. The first thing is that the muscle needs to be allowed to move through its proper range of motion, and I'll be giving examples to come in this video. And then the second thing is that the resistance of the exercise needs to align within the plane of motion that the muscle you're trying to train is responsible for. Doing these two things puts the targeted muscle in the most advantageous position to work against the resistance of the exercise compared to all of the other muscles involved within the movement. The return experience of this is that that target muscle will be working the hardest out of all the other ones, which gives you that feeling that that exercise is working the hardest. The first example I'll use in this video is a triceps extension, and I have two different variations to demonstrate this. The first one is free moving cables that will come across your body, which you won't see very many people do, but I would argue is a more optimal setup, compared to the second variation, which is the common V-bar grip, which is available in almost every single gym, and you'll likely see someone using this attachment every time you go to the gym. So when we're looking at this exercise to see which one is more optimal than the other, what I'm going to look for between these two variations is if we're able to reach the shortened position for the triceps. And when we're trying to reach this shortened position, the first thing we want to make sure is that your arms are neutral with your torso. And then second, we want to get as much elbow extension as we possibly can. So from the side, these exercises, they look relatively similar, but it's from the back when you can really see the difference. So the free moving cables allow the forearm to travel in the direction that we want them to be moving when we're training our triceps, which checks off the first thing for proper setup, which is training those muscles in a range of motion that they're designed to move. And then the second thing we're looking for now is that we're going to try and align the resistance within the same plane of motion that is being performed. So when we're looking at the dual cables, the resistance from those cables, the line of the cable is the line of the resistance. And when we are looking at the dual moving ones, we can see that the cables are about as close to directly aligned with our upper arms as possible, which is 100% what we want. But when we compare it to the V-grip, the resistance from that cable is straight up and down, but from what you can see from behind, in the direction that we want those forearms to move, the forearms are not moving straight up and down, so there's a mismatch between the resistance and the plane of motion that we want our arms to be moving in. And for a lot of people, this can cause some elbow pain. So if you're using this V-bar grip and your elbows are hurting, find something else. For this example of a triceps extension, the dual cables is ideal as it 1, allows the tricep to reach a more shortened position, and 2, aligns the resistance with the plane of motion that we want the arms to be moving in when training our triceps. So this is only one example for one muscle group of what proper setup looks like. Each muscle has different biomechanics, and if you haven't taken a course like any of the ones provided by N1 Education, you're kind of taking a shot in the dark whether or not you're training a muscle as optimally as you want to. And no, you're not going to make no gains if you use the narrow grip if you're doing these tricep extensions. But I would argue, why not get the most bang for your buck? If you're already putting in the effort in the gym, you might as well set yourself up for the most success as possible. Now that you've seen an example of what proper setup for a muscle group looks like, let's move on to what proper execution looks like. You'll likely already have a little bit of the gist of this already, but essentially we want the muscle to do what it was designed to do. And this sounds relatively simple, but it's hard to do and replicate if you're not educated on it. So the first thing I'll go over when looking to properly execute an exercise is looking at the range of motion and what the range of motion is for a specific muscle we're trying to train. So shout out to Lauren for letting me put her through this pull day, and this is me helping her assess what the range of motion will be when we're trying to use her lats during the pull down. So as you're doing the eccentric, if you want to think about reaching out in front of you, say like a piece of cake is on an escalator, you want to reach up and away from you. So that's her end position of the eccentric. And then a cue to initiate the movement, which I'll go into more later on in this video, is driving your elbows down. So that's her end position in the eccentric, and then that's what it looks like when she finishes the concentric. So in this side-by-side, you can see how close she was to executing this pull-down with the same range of motion that we assessed before we even started the exercise itself. And the thing that I want to note here is that when we're trying to train a specific muscle, you might as well stay in the range of motion that muscle is designated to do. She could make this range of motion bigger, which she would do by just pulling the weight down further. What that would do is would start to bring her elbow, would start to round up and shift up like that, which would break this line between her forearm and the handle. And it's not inherently bad that that's happening, but what that would do is shift more of the focus during that end part of the rep to her rear delts. And if the goal is to train the lats, we might as well stay within a range of motion the lats are responsible for doing. And then another thing I want to look at is when she's doing the eccentric. Again, she could be letting the weight bring her up further, She's pulling down. So when we're up to this position right there, she could either lean forward or just let that weight bring her up higher. But we want to stay with this line of her upper arm, because when we compare that to the assessment, we can see that those two lines are pretty damn close, maybe a little bit higher, but nothing is going to be exact. And again, it wouldn't be bad if she let it take her up above this range of motion, but it would be less lats, and if the goal is lats, we might as well stay within the range of motion they're responsible for doing. Once you're working in the right range of motion for whatever muscle you're specifically trying to train, we want to make sure that you're initiating the concentric with that target muscle, or essentially the first thing to move once you're deciding to move the weight is the specific muscle you're trying to train. A big takeaway from this video, if you forget everything else that I've said, is that to just make sure that you're staying in control of the weight and that the weight isn't controlling you. In this next example, I'm going to demonstrate how the same exercise, in this case I'm going to use a seated cable row that Lauren was doing, and we can use the same exercise and end up with two completely different outcomes. So in the first video, I had her do exactly what she would do if I wasn't there at all. And when you watch the video of her doing this, I think it's relatively obvious that you can see that the majority of the work is being done by her upper back. And it's more obvious once you see it from behind. And then in the second video, I switched a few things for her setup-wise, and I had her focus on the intention of getting more stimulus towards her lats. And the cue that I gave her is thinking about driving her elbows down to her hips. And what you'll see when looking at these clips is that there's less overall movement in her shoulder blades, but I'm not purposely telling her to restrict them. That's just what happens once we get more lats involved. The biggest difference you'll see in these two videos is her arm path. So with the setup that I gave her, you can see that she's trying to initiate the movement by driving her elbows down first. And then from behind, when we're looking at the arm path, you can see how much closer that her arms are staying to her torso in the lat focused row compared to the more upper back focused row where her elbows are more out to the side, and she's getting a lot more out of the retraction at the end of the movement. So was the way that she originally set up that seated cable row necessarily wrong? No, definitely not. She was still getting good stimulus out of her upper back muscles, but I would beg to differ that if her goal is to train her lats, she was doing a much more effective job at doing it in the second clip when I changed her setup slightly and then just gave her the cues of arms closer to her torso and starting the movement with driving her elbows down. Once you've got the proper setup and execution in place, that's when you can truly understand how beneficial training in this way is. And for me, it's super satisfying to be able to help people discover this, because for one muscle group, they could figure it out right away. They've been training good with it for the past 5 years of their life, but they have been, say, crushing another muscle group that they don't execute well, and they try as hard as they can. They train super hard, they take it to failure, but they just don't see any results, and it's because they're not doing one of the two things of executing it or setting it up correctly. But once you're able to find these things, my client Nick, that was in the videos earlier, he coined a term called the one-set pumps. And it's once you can get into the... Actually, you know what? I recorded him saying this, so I will let him explain it for himself.
With proper form and execution of the rep, you can get a pump in one set.
So his explanation was pretty short and sweet, but it did a pretty good job at explaining what the one-set pump is. And the benefits of these one-set pumps is that you don't have to spend time wasted away trying to do some activation, using bands. Maybe you can do a little bit, but you don't have to overthink it because you can just get to work right away, put your head down, and just give your effort into pushing as much weight with good form as possible without having to worry about if your activation is good just because you've already figured out how to do it. So there are a few different benefits to applying this definition of mind-muscle connection to your own training. And the first is that once you're able to nail your setup and execution, the output you're going to get from that target muscle will dramatically increase. And again, it'll be like the one-set pump thing. You got to experience it for yourself. But the benefit for this long-term is that let's say you have 5 sets and you're doing 10 reps. If you have really good execution and setup, those 5 sets will give you so much more return on your investment compared to if you're doing 5 sets of 10 with shitty form. For a lot of people, if they do 5 really good sets and they take it really close to failure, they might be fried for that workout. Compared to someone else, if they do those 5 sets of 10 with shitty form, they're going to be like, oh, I don't have that good of a pump, I still can do more. But it's because the stimulus for that rep, that for each and every rep they were doing, wasn't as high because their setup and execution was poor. So that's where they need to add in more exercises to get the same stimulus. And why you don't want to do as much volume, or if you can get away with less volume, that's extremely beneficial, because the less volume needed to achieve a stimulus, the less you have to recover from. And the faster you recover, the sooner you can train again, the more gains you'll see. It just overall better recovery leads to better gains. So the second benefit for this type of training approach is decreasing your risk of injury or any nagging pains that you may have. The triceps example that I used earlier is one of the most commonly seen things that I see give people issues. If someone is bitching about elbow pain, there is a very, very high likelihood that they are pressing for a tricep extension with a narrow grip. If we do the setup and execution correctly, we are placing as much load as possible on the targeted musculature and preventing any unnecessary stress for the surrounding structures like your joints, tendons, and ligaments. And then the third benefit is that this will just help you get an overall balanced physique. And if your goal is to build an aesthetic physique, you are going to want the muscles to grow equally. So if you have a lagging muscle group, odds are one of the two things is wrong via your setup or execution. And some people, they just get lucky and they figure it out right away, while others aren't so lucky, or they were given a bad cue during the beginning of their lifting career, which just completely prevented them from making any gains. Like, say, if someone was told to press with their chest with super high elbows, likely their chest didn't grow very much. Now that I've shown you what to do if you want to achieve this definition of mind-muscle connection, I'm going to go over some things of what you should not be doing or what to avoid. And the first thing I'm going to go over is spending time in the shortened position in an exercise where it just simply doesn't make sense. And the example I'm going to use for this is an RDL versus a bridge, and the goal is to train your glutes. So the function of the glutes is to pull the hips forward, and this movement is called hip extension. And the resistance in both of these exercises is gravity, which is straight up and down. But the line of pull for the bridge compared to the RDL is completely different. The line of pull for the bridge opposes that resistance directly, going straight up against it, whereas the line of pull for the RDL is just completely in the wrong direction. And if you're spending time in the shortened position on the RDL, this is just simply wasted energy, and you're just not getting anything out of this, where you could be spending time doing more eccentrics or spending time in that lengthened position. The next thing to avoid, which many of you were probably taught on one of the first days that you walked into the gym, which is trying to squeeze the muscle extra hard with an internal focus and really trying to think about that muscle. If you want to get a good contraction, bring the weight to that shortened position and just simply stay there and hold it there and don't let it move. If the exercise is chosen correctly and has a properly aligned resistance in that shortened position, the muscles are going to work hard as shit to hold it there if there is resistance to work against. Now I'm going to let Kasim Hansen, the founder of N1 Education, give his take on if you should be internally focusing on the targeted muscle.
Now, when we use intention-based training where I'm trying to squeeze the bicep during that exercise, I can't make the dumbbell heavier. So if the bicep is going to be recruiting more or contracting harder, it has to have something to resist it, or I would just be moving the dumbbell faster. So when we do these squeeze things, what actually is going to happen is you're going to see an increase in the tricep activity, because what's happening is that co-contraction. The tricep is adding extra resistance to match what I'm trying to mentally do in terms of that intent on the bicep curl. The problem with that is, instead of just loading the bicep more, which would be the goal, like mind-muscle connection to the bicep, my goal is trying to get more out of the bicep. The problem with the tricep being the mechanism for that is it's creating inefficiency in terms of my recruitment pattern in terms of elbow flexion. It's actually decreasing my performance, making me more neurologically inefficient, and it's creating more stress around the joint by having this push and pull kind of on both sides of the joint, the two antagonists fighting each other. So when I'm doing a regular bicep curl and focusing on the load, it's nice, it's smooth, the movement is not, it seems essentially effortless. When I start applying intent, the movement is almost like, we'll say, jerky and slower, because my body's trying to manage what the hell am I supposed to do with this combination bicep-tricep movement. If I really wanted to get more out of my biceps, it would be better to simply actually just put more load directly on the bicep. And you will see that the tricep will probably go up a little bit, because a little bit more load on this side of the joint means a little bit more of a stability challenge, but it won't be near as much as when I'm trying to do a co-contraction through internal cueing or trying to focus too much on that squeezy mind-muscle connection sensation-based recruitment.
I could not have said it any better. So essentially to sum it up is, rather than trying to squeeze harder, just add more weight to the bar and keep your form the same. The next clip in this video that I'm going to play is a stance on what is called sensation training, which is where you are super hyper focused on the sensation of that muscle and you're trying to get as intense of a contraction as possible.
So another thing that can lead to heightened sensation is getting us into positions where the joint is kind of compromised and essentially the muscles start having a guarding function around the joint. So one such instance may be actually taking the biceps here through an inappropriate amount of shoulder flexion, okay? And you'll probably already see like a spasmy like type contraction going on. But if I'm in here like this and I'm like using all this shoulder flexion in this plane and trying to do this, what you're gonna see is a very, we'll say, static looking contraction, right? Instead of having these nice waves that go up and down, it's gonna be like it's just going the whole time. That would be a hypertonic contraction where we're kind of guarding the joint more than anything else. But if I were to take the shoulder and go into the appropriate plane, okay, what we would see is significantly less staticky and more of kind of an up and down wave, right? Actually coming so much stronger, just being in the correct spot, right? That we'll see more of that kind of up and down contraction rather than the muscles simply holding on. That hypertonic thing, that's what makes you think the muscle's working harder, but essentially what's happening is because you're doing like this low grade constant contraction, you're almost like slightly occluding and just building up metabolite, is all you're doing is just getting tired fast. So you may experience a burn, you may even get a pump in that tissue, but you're actually decreasing your ability to create stimulus in that tissue.
So just because you have a heightened sensation does not mean that that muscle is working harder. And when you look at those graphs, you could see that the contraction he was getting when he was in a more safer, stable position was drastically higher. And that heightened sensation could just be the muscle being like, hey, motherfucker, like we're in a compromised position and we do not want to be squeezing any harder. And this sucks because this could be super misleading because like, holy shit, like I really feel something really good. But like you said, you might be getting half of worth the contraction of what you could be if you were in the proper setup. So I would highly recommend watching this full video, and I'll tag it up above. He does a full-blown lab experiment on himself where he does the same exercise. It's a bicep curl with an internal focus of squeezing his biceps as hard as he possibly can, and then he has more of an external focus on just simply moving the weight, but he has good form for both of them. He then compares the output of the biceps in both experiments, and what he finds, which you probably aren't surprised from considering his take, is that the internal focus leads to less overall output from the biceps. So this stance on mind-muscle connection kind of goes against the grain of the idea that many bodybuilders have been diehards about for the past 4 decades, but I don't necessarily think it's disproving their point, because there is simply too much anecdotal evidence from so many fucking jacked people that you need to feel the muscle in order for it to grow. But what I want this video to shine a light on is how you can actually achieve this and get that right feeling in it. So what I want you to take away from this is that being hyper-focused on the feeling is not what you want to do. And don't take it from me, take it from Kasim Hansen, the goat of just resistance training information. Take it from him, try it for yourself, and see what happens. What I hope you can take away from this video is that you should do less thinking during the set and more before. So set yourself up for success and know what the setup looks like and how to properly execute the exercise. And then once you find that muscle and get a good feeling for it, then you put the pedal to the metal and you start to train hard. In order to do this though, to find it right away, you're probably going to have to take an ego check, and especially for leggy muscle groups, and you might need to decrease the weight you're using for exercises. But another member of N1 Education, Cody Moxley, a quote from him is that what makes you feel weak today will help you feel stronger tomorrow, or something close to that. And that will definitely apply for your leg and muscle groups. So you might need to take an ego check, go a little bit lighter, but that weight is going to feel like you doubled it once you align yourself properly and execute it correctly. So if you would like to apply this definition of mind-muscle connection of getting the nervous system to automatically use the targeted muscles to oppose the resistance of an exercise if the exercise is set up and executed correctly, if you want to apply this definition into your own training, a big takeaway is just to make sure that you're staying in control of the weight and not letting the weight control you. And then the second thing is to follow me, subscribe to my channel, and especially follow N1 Education and sign up for their courses, because that is the information you need to know if mind-muscle connection is something you want to apply correctly. Applying this definition of mind-muscle connection is not a one-day fix. I'm still learning this shit myself, and I've been training for almost a decade. Granted, the first 75% of it I was doing gym bro things and focusing on sensation training, which I shouldn't have been doing. But now that I know, I'm able to learn it, I've experienced it myself, and I've seen it work on clients. If you're interested in anything else I have to offer that I have made in the name of getting you jacked, head to my website at evolutionaryaesthetics.com. I have some free resources on there for you. I do some free programming for you to follow along with, and subscribe to the channel. Like, share, do the whole YouTube algorithm thing, and we'll see each other in the next video.